There are lots of desert daisies. So these are plants that live in arid areas but don't get by being succulent and storing water, but rather by being an annual. So they leave behind their seeds to go through the dry period, and then new plants come up again next year. So a lot of these provide a lot of color for us, and this one here is a good example, Baileya multiradiata. So it's native to the deserts of the southwest US and also into Mexico, and it provides a lot of yellow color for us over months during the summer, and so we think very highly of it. Also the very pale furry leaves are an attractive part of it too. Hesperaloe parviflora grows in South Texas and southward into Mexico, and it has these wonderful red tubular flowers. So the name Hesperaloe suggests it's related to an aloe, but it really isn't. It's just that the flowers look aloe-like. But this is a very tough desert plant. You can grow it in places like New Mexico, where it can take freezing temperatures in the wintertime, and does well for us here in California as well. This is a cultivar called Sandia Glow with a more orangey red than the usual. There's a California native called woolly blue curls, Trichostema lanata, and that is a wonderful plant for its beautiful blue-purple flowers and also the long curving styles that come out that give it the name woolly blue curls. And this one here is a hybrid of that, and so its name is Midnight Magic. And again, like its parent plant, has these purple flowers and blooms over a very long period in the summertime. Brachychiton is a genus of Australian trees, and this one here is a hybrid. So there's one called Brachychiton discolor with pink flowers, and one called Brachychiton acerifolius with red flowers. And this one is a cross between the two. And this year it's really putting on an amazing show with thousands of flowers. And so we're very happy with what it's doing for us. Brachychiton is an interesting example of a plant whose sepals look petal-like. So this plant has no petals, but the sepals, which are fuzzy and brownish on the outside, open up to show their beautiful pink interior face when they open, and so they serve the function of a petal. Eriogonum is a large genus that is especially abundant in California. We have many, many kinds in California. Some of them are quite low to the ground, and others are bush-like, and that's the case with this one, Eriogonum arborescens. So it becomes a nice little, like a miniature tree. The name arborescens means becoming like a tree, and it has these pinkish flowers, little teeny tiny flowers in rounded clusters in the summer months. This wonderful little bulb is called Boophone distica. It isn't on our What's in Bloom list because it doesn't last long enough, but it's really putting on such a show that we thought we ought to show it to you. So it's from South Africa, and the name distica means that the leaves are all arranged in one plane, but they're not present now. It blooms when the leaves are not there, and then the leaves will come out afterwards, but really looking nice right now. This aloe is named Aloe lavranosii, and it comes from Yemen. It's really not very common in cultivation, but we have both a yellow form and a red form, and so this is the red one. What's remarkable about it is how hairy the flowers are. So there aren't very many aloes that have hairy flowers, and we think this one really ought to be more commonly planted because it's such a showy flower, and so we're doing our best to propagate it and introduce it into horticulture. Here we have another aloe from the Arabian Peninsula. This one's called Aloe armatissima, coming from Saudi Arabia rather than from Yemen. It's, again, not a common plant in cultivation. I don't think I ever see one for sale in a nursery, but you can see these really beautiful yellow flowers with a tinge of green on them, and after making one inflorescence, it's busy making a second one, so it's a repeat bloomer, which is always nice. And this too, again, we're experimenting with it because you don't see it in cultivation. We don't know how tough it is, but it's made it through a couple winters here at the garden, and maybe it's a go for us. Melaleuca is a large genus in the myrtle family, native to Australia. And this particular one has these bottle brush-like white flowers. They're closely related to a bottle brush. And then these little tiny nut-like seed pods, much like a bottle brush also. This is Melaleuca preissiana, and it grows into a large shrub, almost a tree. This plant behind me is Beaucarnea recurvata. It's called the ponytail palm in its common name, although it's obviously not really a palm. And it's oftentimes grown as a houseplant, and it has a wonderful little bulbous caudex at the base, which makes it appealing in a pot. But people really don't realize how big it gets ultimately. This plant here is decades old, and now it's got a big fat base on it now. But eventually that base can get as large as a Volkswagen Beetle, so it really does get to be a good sized plant in time. And when you see it as a potted plant, you seldom see it big enough to flower, as it is doing now. And so the flowers are teeny tiny flowers, very attractive to bees. There are separate male and female plants. The bee visits the male plant to get pollen, and then the female plant for the little daub of nectar in the flower, and in going back and forth it manages to pollinate it. So our plant is a male, and so you can see the inflorescences with their many little teeny tiny whitish flowers. Crassula is a huge genus in the stonecrop family, and there are many of them from South Africa, including this one, Crassula falcata. Actually, its full name is Crassula perfoliata, subspecies falcata, but oftentimes just known as Crassula falcata. And the name falcata refers to the sickle-shaped leaves, which you probably can see on here. The leaves can be blue or green depending on the population, and this is a greener leafed one. But the beautiful red flowers that come out in the summertime, usually in July and August, are a real showstopper. There is a group of East African shrubby aloes, including Aloe elgonica and Aloe dowii, and another one called Aloe kedongensis, and that's what we got this plant as. However, the flowers, which turn yellow as they ripen, seem a little bit light for kedongensis, so it probably is a hybrid. But in any case, it's done so well, and it's hard to believe a plant from so near the equator could thrive in our climate where we get pretty cold in the wintertime. So we're very pleased with the way it's doing for us. Senecio is a large genus in the daisy family, and South Africa has quite a number of them with blue leaves, like this one. This is Senecio ficoides, and a cultivar known as Skyscraper, and because it grows so tall. And so there are the flowers, and they don't really look very daisy-like because they don't have the ray florets that many daisies have that provide that ring around the middle of the flower that gives it that daisy look. And without that, it's just a little tiny cup with teeny tiny flowers within, and really not very showy florally, but a beautiful plant. Aloe striata is a relatively common and widely grown aloe from South Africa, but it has some rarer relatives, and one of them is this one, Aloe arborescens. It grows in the inland hot interior of South Africa and then northward into southeastern Namibia. And it has these wonderful stripes on the leaves, and then these coral red flowers with a stripy tip to them. And it kind of blooms whenever it feels like it. It doesn't have a fixed time of the year that it flowers. The genus Erythrina is in the pea family, and they're really widely distributed around the world. And their common name is coral trees, but they aren't really all trees. This one is a bush. So this is Erythrina bidwillii, which is actually a hybrid of a North American one and a South American one. It's notable for its beautiful, rich red flowers all summer long. So you might have seen in nurseries and garden centers lately something called a mangave. So this is a cross between a manfreda and an agave. So an agave is a century plant with rigid, tough leaves, and a manfreda is a close relative, but it's more like a bulb with soft leaves and oftentimes even deciduous. And the thing that manfredas have that agaves don't is purple spots. So by breeding them together, you get something that's agave-like, but has purple spots, and sometimes really quite sensational. So they're relatively new in horticulture, and people don't often know what they look like when they flower. So this is one called Mangave Bloodspot, and it's really not quite in flower yet, but it's well on the way, and you can see the proportions of it, the 5-foot tall flower stalk, and the beautiful purple spotting on the leaves. Not all century plants are gigantic like we tend to think of them. This is a very modest sized one called Agave flexispina, comes from the Mexican states of Chihuahua and Durango in north central Mexico. And you can see the flower stalk's taller than I am, but it certainly isn't a giant. And these little tiny clusters of flowers, they're really not very colorful. They're a pale green color with a little bit of purple towards the tips. But this is not a species you see in cultivation very often, and it's a treat for us to have it in flower. This plant is called Dazzlerian texanum, and it really is quite typical of Dazzlerians, with strap-like leaves and little tiny but very sharp teeth all the way along the edges, and then these amazingly tall flower stalks that come up, and they have separate male and female plants. So this one is a male, and each one of these little finger-like projections you see coming off the stalk is maybe about 100 flowers. So they're little teeny tiny flowers, but many, many of them. And from the time the first flower opens until the time the last flower closes, the bees are on it. They just love these plants. And so you can see they're working it right now. And so this one comes from Texas, hence the name texanum, but there are many others that come from other parts of the Southwest and also down into Mexico. Plants in the genus Pherocactus are commonly known as barrel cactus, and there's really quite a few kinds from the Southwest United States and southward all over Mexico. And this particular one is Pherocactus pottsii, which comes from northwestern Mexico. And it's notable for its wonderful fruits, which look like little pineapples. And so you can see them on it now. The green ones are this year's flowers, and the yellow ones are from last year's flowers. So they really stay on the plant for a very long time after the bloom. Usually this is a single-headed plant. This is a rare example of a two-headed one. Even if not all the century plants are huge, some of them really are. This one behind me is one we got labeled Agave rascanensis, and that's been declared a synonym of Agave americana, so I guess just a form of Agave americana. But it really has a huge telephone pole-sized flower stalk on it, and this is very attractive to hummingbirds and to bees, and even we get squirrels climbing up there to try and chew on those flowers. So really is an amazing plant with an enormous inflorescence. So a couple weeks ago, this plant had the flower stalk going straight up. Then it started to list a little bit, and then a little bit more, and we realized we were in trouble, so we had to tie it up. So you can see a couple of guy wires there holding it. Grevilleas are in the Protea family, and they come from Australia. There's really a lot of species and a lot of hybrids too. This is a relatively new hybrid called King's Fire. There's a place called King's Park in Perth, Australia, that is where the name comes from. And it has these beautiful toothbrush-like clusters of red-orange flowers over much of the year. The genus Gasteria is a close relative of Aloe, and almost all of them come from South Africa. So there are a lot of species, and they hybridize very readily too. This is a hybrid of Gasteria bicolor. And like bicolor, it has very strong spotting on the leaves and smooth leaves, and these little flowers that look like little commas that are coral at the base and greenish toward the mouth. Obviously, on our What's in Bloom, we have to focus on plants that are in flower for a good period of time so that it's long enough to make the list. And there are lots of other things that have a short bloom time. So it's always a good idea to come here in the garden and see things for yourself. So we're open every day except Monday, and we encourage you to come and visit us. And if you're not nearby and able to come and visit us, visit our website. So on the website, you'll see not only what's in bloom, but plant highlights and events that are coming up and so forth. So thank you for coming and visiting the Ruth Bancroft Garden.